As you may have noticed from my newer videos concerning the Apollo moon landing conspiracy theories, or space topics in general, I have a disclaimer at the beginning. The following video is not intended for scientifically illiterate viewers who think that the Earth is flat or that all space travel is fake. If you subscribe to such nonsense, please stop watching this video and go away. In recent years, YouTube, and the internet in general, has become infested with people claiming that the Earth is flat and that all space travel is fake. Whereas serious moon landing hoax proponents like Bill Casing, Ralph Rene, myself and others all base our position on scientific and photographic data, flat earthers on the other hand preemptively deny space travel in general because any photographs of the Earth from space contradicts their religion. Their argument generally boils down to, the horizon looks flat and water won't stick to balls, therefore Earth is flat.
See that? Just roll the fuck off!
As you guys can see, no way in hell will water ever stick to a spinning ball.
I'm going to set this globe to rotate and we will pour some water. Alright, as we predicted, no water accumulated over the face of this globe Earth.
The horizon always appears perfectly flat.
Water always finds level. So in our own experience in natural physics, you have a cup of tea or a swimming pool or a lake, water is level.
How does water stick to a ball that spins 1,000 miles an hour? Gravity. But gravity is nothing more than a theory.
We cannot live on a ball. Water does not bend in balls. It lies level and flat, always has, always will.
Okay, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Can you demonstrate a rock sphere with water around its surface spinning?
This demonstrates an inability to read past a kindergarten level. The Earth has a circumference of over 40,000 kilometers, and this has been established since Eratosthenes, well over 2,000 years before NASA existed. Therefore, you would need to travel 111 kilometers just to experience 1 degree of curvature. The amount of visible curvature at sea level is simply negligible and can only be inferred from faraway objects becoming blocked by the horizon, or the movements of the stars above us, such as this equatorial example, clearly showing both the northern and southern constellations rotating around their respective celestial poles, while the stars bound east to west move in a straight line. The flat Earth model has no explanation for this. You need to travel higher in order to visually see the curvature more pronounced, and such curvature has been seen from high altitude flights. Flat Earthers should know this because they have photographed the curvature of the Earth from high altitude flights themselves. Consider for example this image by flat Earth idiot Jay Tolan. This image was taken aboard an aircraft flying over Lake Ontario. Take a screenshot and draw a line connecting the left and right edges of the horizon. You can clearly see the horizon arching above this line. And that's not all. Jay Tolan has posted many other videos taken aboard aircrafts in which he claims the horizon is flat, despite the curvature of the Earth being immediately noticeable. This stupidity is on the level of the Emperor's new clothes. The curvature of the Earth is staring flat earthers directly in the face, and yet they claim it's not there. And any water poured on a little ball here on the Earth is already within the Earth's gravity well. Gravity doesn't pull objects down, it pulls smaller objects towards a larger object center of mass, which in the case of something as massive as the Earth is also its core. So it doesn't matter where you are standing on the Earth. You are within the Earth's gravitational well and will fall towards its center of mass. For argument's sake, a beach ball has a mass of about 0.11 kilograms. Through simple rearranging of the acceleration due to gravity formula, we find that the Earth has a mass of over 5 septillion kilograms. That's a 5 followed by 24 zeros. Now suppose you tipped a glass of water over that beach ball, keeping in mind that the ball is already within the Earth's gravity field. Which center of mass do you think the water will fall towards? The 0.11 kilogram beach ball, or the 5 septillion kilogram Earth? And it would simply be impossible for any object to be as massive as the Earth and not be spherical. By definition, a planet is an object in orbit around the Sun that has sufficient mass for its self-gravity to overcome rigid body forces so that it assumes a hydrostatic equilibrium, parentheses, nearly round, close parentheses, shape. You can observe the Sun and the Moon through a telescope, both are clearly spherical. And you can measure their masses through simple observation and some back-of-the-envelope calculations. No need to take NASA's word for it. For example, You can bounce radio signals off the surfaces of the moon and the sun, and use the time it takes for the signal to return to find out how far away they are, which in turn you can use to find their actual diameters and their volume, which in turn you can use to calculate their mass. For example, radio signals bounced off the moon take about 2.4 seconds to make the return trip, meaning that one trip took light 1.2 seconds to reach the moon, which in turn gives you a distance of about 360,000 kilometers. And the moon has an angular diameter of about 0.5 degrees, about half the angular diameter of your index finger held at arm's length. Its true diameter is given by the formula big D equals 2 little d times tan of alpha on 2, where big D is the true diameter, little d is the distance, and alpha is the angular diameter. When we plug in the angular diameter and distance to the moon, we see the moon's actual diameter is approximately 3,244 kilometers. That's a 93.4% accuracy. Now, it should be pretty obvious that the moon is a sphere. Despite claims made by flat earthers who think it's a flat floating disk, the lunar phases that anyone can observe with even the naked eye are perfectly consistent with it being spherical. And I'm just eyeballing it here, but I think we can all agree that the surface appears to be made of rock. We then divide the moon's diameter in half to find its radius, and plug that into the volume of a sphere. We get 18 quintillion cubic meters. Now, for argument's sake, let's assume that the moon is 4/5 rock and 1/5 iron. This is an educated guess, given that the moon does not have a powerful magnetic field or radiation belts, suggesting the lack of a huge liquid iron outer core to generate such a field. Don't blame NASA, the Soviet Union beat them to that discovery. And so when we multiply this volume by the densities, we find the mass of the moon is about 71 sextillion kilograms. Wow, a 97% accuracy. Lucky me. Similarly, the sun appears to be the same angular size as the moon, but we know it must be both further away and physically larger, because it is able to get behind the moon during eclipses. If we bounce radio signals off the sun, the echo will be heard some 16 minutes later. Following the same calculations as before, this gives us a distance of 144 million kilometers. And since we already know the mass of the Earth, we can plug these numbers into Newton's law of universal gravitation to find the mass of the sun. And when we do that, we get a mass of about 2 nonillion kilograms. Gravity has obviously rounded the moon with its inferior mass, and it's also rounded the sun with its vastly superior mass. Why would gravity play favorites and not also round the Earth?
There is no curvature on this Earth. It cannot be measured.
We're not spinning round on the ball.
It's not a clear-cut line.
Right.
The flat Earth should be regarded as the antithesis of the Apollo moon landing hoax movement. It is generally used by believers in the Apollo missions as a tool to mock those who doubt them.
Some flat earthers actually believe astronauts are just actors, part of a huge conspiracy going back to those very first steps on the moon.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
You don't believe that they've gone to space?
No, not at all. The rockets go up, sure. There's nobody in them.
Do you think we went to the moon? I'm just curious.
I know for a fact we went to the moon.
Oh, for a fact?
Yes. 100% of the evidence tells us we went to the moon. Those astronauts are liars.
The best example I've seen as to why the flat Earth nonsense is so damaging to the moon hoax movement comes from an analogy given by Bart Sabrell.
When I first started my investigation into the moon landing fraud around 1989, I saw many times how those opposed to this lie being exposed would put people who saw the truth of this government deception into the same category as those who long ago used to mistakenly believe that the Earth was flat, thus attempting to divert attention from their crime of the moon landing fraud being exposed by childishly labeling those who reveal this treasonous action of theirs as just as crazy as those who believe that the Earth is flat. Think about this. A person arrives at a party and says, "Let me tell you why the moon landings are false." Yet a moment later they add, "Oh yeah, and by the way, the Earth is flat too." What would the people think of what the person just said about the moon landings being false, despite the fact that the moon landings were indeed falsified? They would say, "I almost believed them about the moon landings," until they said that the Earth was flat. The only objects in space that are not spheres are broken fragments from objects that used to be spheres before explosive collisions.
Back when I first became heavily involved in the moon hoax movement, the flat earth nonsense was an obscure delusion, a tiny society of village idiots separated from the rest of humanity. And associating Apollo hoax proponents with the Flat Earth Society was always the go-to ad hominem attack used by Apollo believers and propagandists. Their typical response was, "We got scientists on our side, you have the Flat Earth Society on your side." But that was in 2005. 14 years on, I kid you not, I am now viciously attacked by vocal thousands, and I mean thousands of proponents of the Flat Earth business. Such proponents are fond of leeching off my various moon hoax videos, then act all surprised to learn that I don't support their stupid beliefs. It's not just my work they abuse. They abuse Bill Casing's work, Ralph Rene's work, Bart Sabrell's, David Percy's, you name it. In a world where social media has rapidly become the new weapon of mass destruction, many people wise enough to know that the Earth isn't flat have begun to suspect that the Flat Earth movement today is a well-funded operation by intelligence agencies, with the intention of introducing misdirection and confusion, aiming to undermine years of research and investigation into the Apollo moon landings.
The Flat Earth distraction is most definitely an internet psychological operation designed for this very purpose, to distract and discredit the emerging truth of the deplorable government's moon landing deception, the exposed truth of which would bring about the government's very destruction. Nearly all flat earth web postings online are fictions, created by the CIA in a desperate and juvenile attempt to distract and divide people from the ever-increasing facts coming to light of their long-ago despicable deception of the moon landing fraud, demonstrated by their continual and dire attempts to tie the flat earthers and the moon landing frauders together, just as they unsuccessfully tried to do in the 1980s when these facts of the moon landing fraud first started to come out, and now again with the success of my film A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, all done in a childish and desperate attempt to discredit and distract from the emerging truth of their despicable deception about the moon landings.
In order to further this aim, these individuals and groups keep citing our moon hoax work as so-called evidence that all space travel is fake and the Earth is flat. Often when it is pointed out that they have been misusing our content, these fools go so far as to call me a traitor to the cause, or allege that I sold out to NASA or SpaceX or whoever. This demonstrates that, despite leeching off the research by myself and other Apollo hoax proponents, they never actually bothered to read into our work. Had they done so, they would know that we've all cited space travel in one way or another, and even proposed using space travel to pull off the Apollo hoax events. For example, Bill Casing suggested that the geological data from the unmanned surveyor missions could have been used to give NASA an idea on how to fake moon rocks.
I will concede that certain unmanned vehicles might have made it to the moon. The Russians are supposed to have sent some unmanned vehicles to the moon, and possibly our surveyor did land on the moon, but units with people in them, never.
He also proposed using unmanned missions to simulate the telecommunications. He even cites Tetra and the TTS series of satellites as examples of space missions used to train ground controllers. Percy and Sabrell both believe that the Apollo astronauts stayed in low Earth orbit for the duration of the time that they were supposed to be on their moon missions, thus allowing them to record film and videos of genuine zero gravity.
From the Apollo 11 command module, the CSM, we're being shown two different views of Earth, but both cannot be correct. Given that the first version is purporting to be over halfway to the moon, and on closer examination is seen to be a colour transparency, we have to conclude that this image is not a true representation of the CSM's position. However, the time recorder reads out a mission elapsed time of 34 hours and 16 minutes.
34 hours, 16 minutes, and 15 seconds. Can you see that clearly enough, Charlie?
Where could they be? Well, as the second view of Earth fills the craft's window, we must conclude that they're in the relative safety of low Earth orbit, and not on their way to the moon at all.
Sabrell has even stated repeatedly that the astronauts were really in low Earth orbit during his many encounters with them.
When you were supposedly halfway to the moon when in fact you were in Earth orbit.
It shows that you're in Earth orbit. Now,
and appeared to be halfway to the moon when in fact they were in Earth orbit.
Huh, really?
Yeah, and they said it was the same way that you did it on Apollo 10.
Rene cited the Soviet Lunokhod rovers as evidence that you can deploy a retroreflector on the moon without sending people there.
The Russians had landed a laser reflector on this unmanned lunar probe. Could the Americans have done the same?
I myself have cited the unmanned lunar orbiter probes, which mapped the lunar surface down to 1 meter resolution, and thus enabled NASA to create accurate models of the moonscape for training purposes. These pictures would also help NASA to future-proof the Apollo hoax. By using the lunar orbiter pictures as a reference, they could build accurate sets and props that would correlate well with surface features photographed by any post-Apollo missions. I've also cited the Zonda 5 mission, which transmitted cosmonaut voices from the moon and initially duped the Americans into thinking that the spacecraft was manned, thus providing a proof of concept of what would be required for faking a mission to the moon. And speaking of Zonda 5, I've had to make several videos in the past explaining to people that the lifeforms aboard Zonda 5 were radiation extremophiles, lifeforms that can harmlessly absorb huge amounts of radiation, and that their survival aboard Zonda 5 thus doesn't prove that humans can survive the radiation on a flight to the moon. And speaking of which, let's not forget Ralph Rene. In his book, he stated that he believed that all the Mercury missions were real. And of course, he also cited data from the various satellites and space probes that detected the Van Allen belts. Rene and many of his followers have argued that the radiation belts would be lethal to astronauts.
Before they got 1/2 to the moon, they would have picked up a death dose of radiation.
The reason why they couldn't go to the moon is because of a phenomenon that few people know about called the Van Allen radiation belts.
Any human being traveling through the Van Allen belt would have been rendered either extremely ill or actually killed by the radiation within a short time thereafter.
Every manned mission in history, Gemini, Mercury, Skylab, the Space Shuttle, has been below the radiation belt, all except going to the moon.
The point is that the American Apollo astronauts did not have protection against these levels of radiation. And we know that because NASA now admit, as a result of the Orion craft, which is Apollo 2.0, that the levels of radiation are such that they have to find out means to protect them before they can send humans through these levels of radiation. But they'd sent the Apollo astronauts, so what's the problem? The problem is they didn't send the Apollo astronauts.
Obviously, the only shielding they had was the literally paper-thin outer hull of aluminum, and their suits consisting of glass fiber, some aluminum fibers, and silicon rubber.
It's very interesting concerning radiation that the astronauts were protected by a thin film of aluminum when here on Earth they put a lead shield on us when they take a dental x-ray.
I myself have even used data from the AP8 model to calculate the proton doses that the astronauts would have received. And of course, the AP8 is based on averages of satellite proton flux data derived from over 20 satellites between the mid-1960s and early 1970s. I even used correction factors that were established from much later satellite observations. It is important to note that the Van Allen belts exist due to solar protons and electrons becoming trapped within the Earth's magnetic field. This field is generated by the rotation of the Earth's liquid iron outer core. And while you can't drill all the way down to this outer core, you can detect it with global seismology. Such seismic surveys have been established long before NASA existed. Thus, the existence and mere discovery of the Van Allen belt is only consistent with the Earth being a sphere and space travel being possible. Despite this, some flat earthers and space travel deniers have been stupid enough to cite the Van Allen belt as evidence for their nonsense. I've even seen some of these ill-informed people mirror some of my videos on the Van Allen belt, with flat earth erroneously added to the title or description. Only a complete idiot would cite the Van Allen belts as evidence for anything and then turn around and say that the Earth is flat and that all space travel is faked. When this is pointed out, flat earthers are quick to backpedal or handwave. Some deny that the belts exist, despite previously citing them as evidence. And others even go so far as to claim that the Van Allen belt is actually the firmament covering their flat Earth, whatever that means. This in itself demonstrates that they can't even keep their stories straight, or even produce a working and consistent model of their fantasy world. These people claim that the Earth is a flat disk with Antarctica acting as an ice ring around the outer edge, and that the Sun and Moon are somehow hovering some 3,000 miles above in a circle, with the night sky contained within a gigantic rotating dome encapsulating the Earth, the so-called firmament. If the Van Allen belt was actually the firmament, as flat earthers have backpedaled, why would it be an obstacle in trying to reach the Moon? Why would it be a barrier to something that's below it? Hell, the real inner Van Allen belt actually begins at only 1,000 kilometers and extends to some 7,000 kilometers. If it's really the firmament, this places the alleged altitudes of the Sun and Moon within it. How then could the Sun and Moon fly above their flat Earth in a circle? You can't have it both ways. Now true, flat earthers may argue that it's the dome rotating the Sun and the Moon, but if they are embedded in the firmament, how could the Sun get behind the Moon during eclipses? Or consider equinoxes and solstices. During the spring equinox, the noon sun will appear directly overhead an observer on the equator, while during the summer and winter solstices, it will appear directly overhead observers in the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. This means on the flat Earth, the Sun must be moving back and forth between these latitudes. How then could the Sun possibly do so if it were embedded in the impenetrable dome? It can't. That's physically impossible. This scenario doesn't even withstand Tycho Brahe levels of scrutiny. So the Sun and Moon must both be outside the dome. If so, just what are the Sun and Moon orbiting around anyways? An orbit is simply a state of equilibrium in which an object is falling towards the center of mass of a more massive object but moving forward just as fast. If the larger object was not there, the smaller object would shoot off in a straight line. If the smaller object suddenly lost its forward velocity, it would quickly fall towards the larger object. So where's the center of mass that the Sun and Moon are interacting with? You can't orbit around another object without interacting with said object's center of mass. In this reality, we obey the laws of orbital mechanics. If they are not interacting with a center of mass, the only other option is controlled flight, which leads to an even more fundamental problem. Much the same way an orbit is a state of equilibrium between forward and downward velocities, controlled flight is simply a state in which four opposing forces are equalized. Aeroplanes are able to fly, or as flat earthers would put it, defy gravity, because they have wings and engines to generate lift and propulsive thrust, to respectively fight against gravity and drag. Okay, so what's giving the Sun and the Moon a lift? What's giving them the propulsion to continuously move in a circle? Aeroplanes don't carry an infinite supply of fuel, and they will fall out of the sky if they run out. You can't just magically remain in the sky without anything to provide lift or thrust to keep you there. The first thing you'll learn in thermodynamics is conservation of mass and conservation of energy, which state that mass and energy are neither created nor destroyed. So if the Sun and Moon are in some kind of powered flight above the Earth, what's giving them the lift and propulsion? And how are they able to achieve this continuous lift and propulsion without violating conservation of mass and conservation of energy?
In this house, we obey the laws of thermodynamics!
And while flat earthers are quick to claim that all space travel is faked, or that space travel is impossible for whatever reason, they fail to consider one fundamental problem. It presents an unresolvable paradox. If space travel was impossible, it would also be impossible to fake it. As explained in my previous video, when the Soviets sent the Zonde 5 around the Moon, the Americans initially and mistakenly believed that the spacecraft was manned because cosmonaut voices were transmitted from it and received on the Earth. But it was later revealed that the voices in fact originated from Crimea, and the Zonde 5 simply acted as a repeater. The Zonde 5 is a proof of concept as to how you would go about faking a flight to the Moon in such a way as to fool anyone with the technology to listen in and track the spacecraft. The unmanned Sputnik 10 also provided a proof of concept. In this case, an unmanned Vostok capsule was sent into orbit with a tapes recorder aboard. And despite the Russians' best efforts to avoid confusion, some who listened in at the time did mistakenly believe that the capsule was manned. Case in point, if space travel was impossible, how would it be possible to send unmanned probes into space in order to relay messages or transmit pre-recorded voices? That's a paradox these flat earthers can't resolve. They are quick to claim that everything in space is fake, yet fail to realize that space travel would be required to pull off a hoax. People who seriously subscribe to this flat earth nonsense and space travel denial are either idiots functioning below the expectation level of a kindergarten student, con artists trying to prey on anyone stupid enough to buy their products or watch idiotic YouTube videos which are designed to generate income through ad revenue, or disinformation agents trying to undermine years of research into credible and valid conspiracy theories by associating them with such nonsense. People generally tell me that I shouldn't be wasting my time on these imbeciles, that I should be focusing on making more moon hoax videos and ignoring the flat earth. Unfortunately, this is no longer a matter of a few idiots, scammers and disinformation agents. This flat earth nonsense has gotten so far out of hand that it is now corrupting the moon hoax movement and even hijacking the legacy of its founding fathers. This brings me to a very serious issue and my main point of contention with this flat earth nonsense, but it won't fit in one video. In the next video, we are going to learn how the flat earth nonsense has created Bill Casing's biggest traitor, a new propagandist who potentially is capable of more damage than the likes of Phil Plait and Jay Windley could ever hope to. I am of course talking about the webmaster of the so-called Bill Casing tribute website, Albino Gallopini.
In the life of anyone with a wife or anything to care for, there just is not enough time to elevate your mind and clear out all the lies. You see, the stress is the key to all the powers that be. They can move secretly, so if we let them conceal whatever is the deal behind the smiles and handshakes, we'll have a flat earth spinning like a corn on the ground, because the king with his army pushed the evidence down. Yeah, they felt to mute the queen from delivering sound. Scaramouche, scaramouche, scaramouche. We've got a flat earth spinning like a corn on the ground, because the king with his army pushed the evidence down. Yeah, they felt to mute the queen from delivering sound. Scaramouche, scaramouche, scaramouche. There's people dying in vain, cause someone let science reign and fear will mumbo jumbo. Who made who, what to do? Does anyone have a clue? Is anyone really open? When competition is key, when all is about more money, it seems that truth doesn't matter. Someone asked where's the love? Could be a fear of above that never lets it shine through.